Hi everyone, we're live at the PRSA International Conference in Indianapolis. I'm Deirdre Breckenridge and I'm here with Mary Barber from the Barber Group, CEO, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, Mary, it's so nice to have you with us. So,
Thanks.
how's the conference going so far?
Conference is great. I just love this conference because I get to see so many friends who
Oh,
I don't see at other times during the year except online, or
well, thank goodness for social media because we can at least stay connected on Twitter.
we know
or
what each other are
Facebook.
doing.
Exactly, but
Yeah.
there's nothing like in person.
No, there really isn't.
And
There
that's-
really isn't. And I don't think that's ever going to go away.
I hope not, because
Yeah.
you can't hug online. I mean, sure, there's emojis and emoticons, but
They're not the same.
no. And you know what? That sort of brings us into our topic of modern relationships and how things have changed. So, what do you, when you look at relationships and PR, because they go together hand in hand, what do you bring forward from the past that really helps with relationship building?
I think that what you bring forward from the past really is a lot of the core that makes PR PR. You can't build relationships if you don't know why you're building them, if you don't know where you're trying to go.
Exactly.
There's a saying in Alaska that you can't be the lead dog unless you know where you're going.
That's
and,
right.
and it's really true. If you don't know what you're trying to do, if you don't have a strategy, you don't have a goal, you don't really know what you're doing. You don't know where you're going to go, and you also don't know when you got there.
Oh,
That's
exactly.
the other part.
So that is really important, and there are just so many. Feels like there's a lot of change and evolution in our role. What would you say are some of the challenges, maybe around media and relationships in general?
I think the challenges around relationships in general are how fast they can go south,
Yeah.
as well as how fast you can grow them. And you have to be careful who you're growing them with because it may not be the person that you really thought it was.
Right.
And so it's hard. It used to be that you knew somebody because they knew somebody because they knew somebody and you met them at a lunch.
Right.
Now it can be somebody that you have never met.
Mm-hmm.
I have somebody filling in for me with one of my clients this week while I'm traveling. I've never met her. I know her work, I know her
Right.
reputation, but I don't know her.
Right.
It's kind of a gutsy thing.
Yeah.
I think she'll be fine. I think the projects that she's doing for me, it'll be fine, even if they need to be tweaked a little bit. But we don't always know people, and so you don't know necessarily the depth of what you're getting.
So that really begs a question because all of us as communicators, it's natural for us to build relationships online. So even though we want to be in person, we're using our social networks to get out there, but you're aligning your brand. So how careful, how are you checking? Are you checking? Should you be?
Oh, I think you definitely should be checking. And I usually choose people because they know somebody else who I know
Right.
in real life.
Yeah.
Or I choose somebody because they've worked on a project that I have a lot of knowledge about, or they know someone who I know. So the real life, I think relationships are still there, even if we don't know the person in real life, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
I think that you have to check them. LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
is a place where you can find information about people. You can look at their
can tell a lot
recommendations.
about them.
You can tell a lot by how they wrote their profile, how updated it is. I looked at someone the other day and his profile, he changed jobs 5 years ago, and it's not updated. So obviously,
Is he applying for a job?
yeah, he was actually.
See, everybody should know this is the first
The
place
first
that
thing
we
you
go.
do.
Yeah, it's Google and you're checking out LinkedIn profiles. It's important. It says a lot about who you are.
It's your reputation.
exactly.
And today it's even more of your reputation than it used to be. I do some work with my alma mater, and I talk to students a lot about social media and how you have to be so careful what you say.
right,
And when you're 18 and you're invincible and you're at a party, you don't understand that.
right, and you're not thinking about it.
And it's like, but no, you really shouldn't put that picture of you with the keg in your mouth on your LinkedIn profile
Literally.
picture. It just doesn't
Yeah.
belong there. But it's hard. And
Mhm.
for them, they
It's a
don't.
hard lesson.
It's a very hard lesson.
learned.
Yeah.
Exactly, but I think it starts really young. And when I think about relationships in general, of course, I do think about the media. And do you think that we see all these new influencers. So we've expanded beyond the media. What does that mean to you when I say, an influencer? What is influence?
It depends. Again, I'm going to go back to it depending on what you're trying to do.
Right.
Because you may be an influencer in the social media field. But if my client doesn't need social media, then you're not an influencer to me in that instance. But I think an influencer is someone who somebody else thinks has influence over a subject or an issue, a metropolitan area. I think it really depends on what, again, that strategic target.
Right.
If you're living in Alaska for 24 years, is like you can pretty quickly be a big fish in a small pond. And you know everybody pretty quickly if you're in our field.
Right.
And that's how you have influence, but that's also how you know who the other influencers are. And I think that it changes when you go to a bigger market.
Right.
But it's really just someone who somebody else thinks is an expert in something or has knowledge in something. And so that really changes too as public relations changes, because the person who has influence could be one person who's reaching the right other person.
Right. And they might act based on what that person says or does.
Right. And it also means that to a certain extent, I think the media in general has less influence in many cases, because I don't necessarily need the media to convince you to buy my product. Instead, I need to find the blogger who you read every day when that person posts about what you're looking for, and I need to convince that blogger to write something that you will then see.
Or the YouTuber, or the Instagrammer. So it really depends. You see all these different facets of influence and through different types of media.
Well, and that's also why I have clients who come to me and they say, well, I'm told I have to be on Twitter. Well, who's your audience?
Right. Why?
Who you're trying to reach? Because if you're not trying to reach the audience that's on Twitter, there's no reason to waste your assets.
Exactly.
It takes too long to build your profile.
Absolutely. So, we are by nature the storytellers, and I think that's something that we'll always bring forward with us. But it's also, what role do the storytelling, and there's a lot of content creation, all different content that we're using now. What role does that play with relationship building?
I keep saying things are at the core, but if we don't have a good story to tell, then we can't create content.
Right.
That is going to help build a relationship, that is going to get us the influence that we need. And so I think the planning is at the core, but the planning has to include how you're going to tell that story and what the story really is. And it used to be, I think, that we could say, this is our story, and we'd who, what, where, when, why, and how in a press release, and it was maybe one page, and you took it to the media and they turned it into a story. We have to now craft that story in a very engaging way, like we didn't have to do
right
when I was in the early days of my career and mimeographing press releases that went through the mail.
Right.
Yeah.
And messages were coming down from the C-suite, and we were just putting them into wherever they were going to be, in a news release or in a brochure or a newsletter. But there's now we're listening and we're understanding what people need in all different formats.
And I also think listening is a really good thing to bring up too, because listening is even more important than it was, but also so is hearing.
Oh, yes.
And I think they're totally different.
Right. That's
because
a really
I can sit here
point.
and listen to you, but if I'm not hearing what you're telling me,
it doesn't matter.
And I think that makes the story need to be even more compelling and concise. Because
Absolutely.
we don't have an attention span that's very long anymore either.
No.
Squirrel.
8 seconds.
Yeah, we're done.
Less than a goldfish.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so it's really changed things. But at the same time, the basis, I think, is still there.
Right. So do you think, moving forward, will we always be poised to be those connectors and the relationship agents, as I like to call them? What is it about us what characteristics?
I think that those of us who will be successful will always be the connectors.
Yeah.
And able to build relationships and that type of thing. I was meeting with some students this afternoon, from Cal State Fullerton, and they asked me what advice I would give them as they're getting ready to graduate. And I said, network, build your relationships, build those connections, and ask every single person who you meet who else you should talk to that can help you. And it's that spider web kind of thing that we've been building for years. And they asked me who my oldest contact was professionally, and I said, well, actually, until he died 2 years ago, it was the boss at my first job.
That's wonderful.
And if I needed anything, I could call him and he would do whatever I wanted.
Right, a mentor for years.
Yeah, and I think that having those mentors is what also helps us to connect and
to
helps us to build and grow. And he would call me and he'd say, so, he was old school, so honey, what have you done lately? And I'd tell him and he'd say, well, honey, what if you did it like this? And he was always right.
And he was always right.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, I find today that, and when I'm mentoring, I'm also being mentored. There's so much reverse mentoring going on, especially with those students. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's amazing. They are incredible. And that's what I was trying to tell them too. They said, thank you so much for your time. And I said, no, thank you for coming over to talk to me, because you do. You always learn something. And I think also if you're not learning, you're not hearing.
That's a great point. Mary, thank you so much for all of your insights and for chatting with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.